Hey everyone, welcome to our series on how to market to federal buyers in your industry with federal contracts. Today in this video, we're going to talk about how to work with federal buyers to sell your products or services, and we've broken it down into two parts. So here's part one, and let's get into it. So here's what you'll learn in this video. You'll learn the structure of the acquisition community and federal contracting officers. You'll learn or get an overview of a day in the life for a federal contracting officer. It's not that hard to understand, but I think you need to know a little bit about them in order to do business with them and to understand what their world is like. It's really important. It makes a difference. And then we'll talk about their role and responsibilities as federal contracting officers and federal buyers. And lastly, we'll talk about what they must do by law to work with small businesses and set aside contracts. So let's face it, federal buyers, officially known as contracting officers, some people even call them KOs, they're just people like us. It doesn't feel that way, but when you got your first commercial client, it was kind of the same way. I mean, you may have had some butterflies before you went to talk to them, or you wondered how should you approach them, but all of that became just part of doing business, and maybe most of it went away. For most of us it does, especially after you do it over and over and you get used to it. These guys are the same way. It's just a little different in how they do business. And it's governed by rules and regulations. And those rules and regulations actually protect you and the taxpayer dollars. So just remember, they're human. I know sometimes they may not seem like it, because everybody acts like it's a secret in dealing with them, but it's really not. And the more emotion you take out of it, the better you will be and the more successful you will be. So let's talk about the acquisition community and the contracting officers. The acquisition community consists of federal contracting officers, heads of acquisition departments. That would be the bosses. Like when you see a title that says Chief of Acquisition, that's where they get their guidance and their direction from. And then support procurement center representative folks, like people that work for the SBA. Whether you realize it or not, there are people in the SBA that are there to protect small businesses. Their only job is to protect small businesses and to help small businesses succeed in the federal contracting arena. Now, it may not feel that way sometimes, even though I feel that way too. I know that's one of the reasons I have a job. That's one of the reasons that I do really well in my job, is because I know all of the things that you don't have time to study and learn on your own. And then I've been doing this for a while, so I understand how things go. Even if there's a map sometimes, even though the SBA does not give you a map, but let's say that there were a map, it would still be complicated because it takes so much time and energy to learn these things. So that's why I love these videos, is because it will help you to understand things you never really thought about, and it'll help you to make better decisions. And most of all, it will help you to not waste your time. So you have this group of people that their jobs is to make sure that they're spending taxpayer money to run the government, and they have rules and regulations by which they do that. The heads of acquisition actually set the direction for the contracting officers. The procurement center representatives, the PCRs, they represent the small business set-aside interest. Again, they work for the SBA. I've talked to you about PCRs before. You may not remember, but if you go through the 5 steps, PCRs are very important people, and they may not see themselves as important, but they're important because they're very smart and they're required to be smart. They have to understand what it takes to manage all of that money and ensure that small businesses are getting their portion. That would be the 23% small business set aside. So that would equal to the $92 billion of the $400 billion that is being spent every single year. And each agency is set up this way. So each agency has an acquisition team. And do they buy just for one agency? Not necessarily. It just depends on what the situation is. And the people that they buy for are called users. You may have heard me mention users before, but it would be users would be the folks that need the actual products and services that the contracting officers are buying. The contracting officers, which we also call federal buyers, report to specific agencies, and they are housed in offices all around the country. Contracting officers not only buy for their departments, I mentioned this before, but they buy for other agencies as well. They often buy for other agencies and other employees. I mentioned this, other employees called users. They have meetings to set spending limits and spending goals and objectives for the COs to follow during the entire process. What's a day in the life of a contracting officer? What does that look like? Well, it's not that pretty. I mean, you may imagine them sitting up there. You're only thinking about what you sell, which could be one or two products, or your business, or maybe you offer one service, but it's not like that for them. They buy many products and services. So the contracting officer wears many hats, and it is not an easy job, not at all. Their telephones are ringing off the hook, emails overflowing, and they get demands from different directions. Now, even though I'm telling you this, I also make no excuses for them. It's not your fault that their jobs are this way, but if you know how to work with them, it makes it easier for you to get to them, and they look at you differently. So that's why I did this little two-part video, because I want you to understand how to work with these guys. They buy from many different arenas. They buy many different things from many different people for many different reasons. They don't always know about every single item that they buy, and they have little time to find out. They need solutions, they need good pricing, they need solid products and services, and businesses have to get that. If you don't get that, you're not going to do well in this arena. So you have to be confident, and you have to be ready to offer solutions that could work. And you don't need to feel weird about, asking questions. Of course, sometimes there are specific times that you're guided to ask questions and get answers, but regardless, give them your best pricing, and because it's not like you can go back and forth unless it's a negotiated contract, but most of the time you need to give your best deal coming out the door. And you need to make sure that you can deliver, because one thing people don't realize is it's a lot easier to win federal contracts as a small business than it is to win state contracts. And you could bid on a opportunity and get it the first time. So be ready. So what are the contracting officer roles and responsibilities? The contracting officers are required to make sure they're educating themselves to make the best industry purchasing decisions, because they're using taxpayers' money. This is not their own personal money. This is not the agency's money. They have to make the best decisions. They need to purchase many different items for many different agencies, as I mentioned before. So they need to ensure that the government is running. If they don't buy these products and services, the government could shut down. We know of other reasons and ways the government shuts down, but these are items that are necessary and are needed to run the federal government. The federal government does not make anything. They don't create anything. All they do is manage. So they need to buy from small businesses and big businesses. They also, the contracting officers, set the set-aside code, which would be the NAICS code. And I said the set-aside code, but they set all of the NAICS codes used in any solicitation, whether it's for big business or small business. They have the responsibility to ensure that the process is also fair based on regulations. So it's not like they can make it up as they go. That's how come I can talk to you about what the laws are and what happens when a contracting officer or a federal buyer is not following procedure. They also determine which government vehicle to use, which would be something like a GSA schedule, if they want it to be narrowed down to just total small business, or if they want it to be full and open competition, or if they want to use 8A, or if they want to use veteran-owned businesses, whatever you name it, that's what they have to do, and that's what they have to understand, and that's what they have to know. They also have to conduct market research for small businesses like yours. They can do any type of research, but mostly I'm going to talk to you about the type of research that they do under the Small Business Dynamic Database. But they need to make sure that they're doing research so they can get the best business for the best price and the best quality. It's not always about price. With small businesses, you're allowed a little bit of leeway. Maybe your pricing is just a little bit higher. But they need to conduct market research under the NAICS codes and the PSC codes that they have chosen. This is why it's so important for you to do your homework, because if you don't do your homework and know what code the contracting officer is using, you won't find the opportunities that come out from that contracting officer. And lastly, please note, contracting officers are not required to use the same codes you use. It's important that you learn which NAICS and PSC codes are being used by contracting officers in your industry by doing research. Again, if you don't know that, you're going to miss out on opportunities. And they're not going to find you when they're looking for you. I know it's kind of unfair because people tell you what code you should use, but you got to use your common senses and listen to what I'm telling you. You can look all day long for codes on your own, codes that literally make sense, and not find any opportunities. You got to know what codes the contracting officers, the federal buyers, are using. That is the key. How contracting officers must work with small businesses by law. So contracting officers must, by law, know all of the small business programs. That means all the certification programs, which happens to be a lot. That means they need to know about WOSB, EDWOSB, veteran-owned programs, service-disabled veterans, small disadvantaged businesses, HUBZone, and 8A. And GSA and some of those are vehicles, but they need to know about all of these business programs and how they work for small businesses so that they can meet their small business goal of 23%. And then they need to know how to set aside contracts, when to choose which group and how. They need to specifically know when they should be setting aside for women-owned businesses, veteran, 8As, HUBZones, you name it. But they must set aside on a regular basis. And when they set aside, no large companies can participate, which is an outstanding thing for you and other small businesses. But here's the thing. Even when they set aside just for small businesses, a lot of times your competition is still limited because you don't have that many small businesses bidding, because a lot of people don't know what to do. They don't know how to do what you're about to learn how to do. So your competition, you may find, is 2 other companies. This is why be careful what you ask for, because you just may get it. If you bid, you just may win against 2 other people. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. So the contracting officer must only allow small businesses for any types of products or services that are between $3,000 and $150,000. If it's between 3,000 and 150,000, large companies are not supposed to have the first option to bid. Now, if large companies don't, or if small companies, if small companies don't bid, then large companies can go for the bid once the contracting officer changes whether or not it's a set aside. But this is why we have these rules and regulations. Can you imagine if every time you wanted to bid on something as a small business, and remember, small businesses can be very well to do also. Small businesses can be under $40 million. You can be up to a $36.5 million business to be exact. And if you're a manufacturing company, you can be a little higher than that. You can be up to $36.5 million, maybe a little higher, it's under $40 million, and still be considered a small business. So you're still competing with other large companies. Most people don't even consider a double-digit multi-million-dollar company a small business, but it is by law and by federal standards. So you could still compete with those people, but not all the time. And what helps is if the contracting officer, the federal buyer, sets the opportunity aside and he allows it to be a WOSB, or he allows it to be an SDV, which is a small disadvantaged business or a small disadvantaged veteran-owned business, either one of those. So when they set it aside, not just for small business, but they add a certification set aside to it, it really limits your opportunity. And then you feel like, oh my goodness, this world is not so big after all. I could really compete and I could win. And then number 4, they can only allow for $150,001 all the way up to $300,000. From $150,001 up to $300,000, total small business is even out of the game. Only certified businesses can compete. When an opportunity is between $150,001 all the way up to $300,000, you're only going to see set-asides for these different groups: WOSB, which includes EDWSB, service disabled veterans, small disadvantaged businesses, 8As, hub zones, and that's basically it. Okay, so you're not going to see even regular small businesses being able to compete in these opportunities. So that eliminates some of those larger companies that we were talking about. Okay, some of those larger small businesses. Because again, if you're a $2 million or a $500,000 company, or you're just starting and you've only made $10,000, but you want to compete for something that you can do at $150,001, you should have the right to do that without being worried about maybe having to compete with a $40 or $36 million company. So just keep that in mind. The law is set up to help you win and to protect you as a small business. And lastly, there are situations where contracting officers can only allow full and open competition with large companies if and when small businesses do not bid. And that's a problem, ladies and gentlemen. I've talked about that before. When small businesses don't bid, the big businesses get all of the contracting dollars. So we need to bid. And with that said, you can win too if you want to. It's just a choice. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, part 2. And please leave me your comments, and don't forget to subscribe and let me know what you need to talk about in your industry. Okay, I'm Michelle Brown with FedBiz Exchange. Thank you for joining me. See you in the next video.